So I'm Sinead Moran.
And I'm Michael McGrath.
And we manage Gleann Buí Farm here in Aghamore, County Mayo. We call ourselves a micro dairy. We describe micro dairy as being independent. Micro is kind of obvious, we're small. We're currently will be milking 14 cows, but we produce and sell raw milk direct to consumers.
We took over this farm in 2010 from my late uncle. The farm has been in our family, we're in the 5th generation now. So yeah, we were lucky enough to get what we call a little slice of heaven. So it was never farmed intensively, never really reseeded or anything like that. So we're lucky enough to have old traditional grasses and stuff like that on the farm. So it plays a huge part in what we're doing as well and what we're producing like. I grew up on a farm. We had a small little farm, 6 miles as the crow flies from here. And it was never anything massively intensive or that kind of thing. But once I left school and that and started working, I kind of drifted away from it. That ended up drifting as far as Australia in 2008. And then, as I say, in 2010, my uncle died and he left us this place here. So it was a thing of, do we stay or do we go, or how would we work it if we did come back? Like, so we did come back, but 2011 was tough enough here as well. Like, so we ended up in Dublin for a few years. Sinead was in college and I was working in Dublin, but it was always in the back of the mind that we'd get there at some stage. Well, in the back of my mind anyways, that we'd get here at some stage. I always, like, I practically grew up down here, even though I lived in Greenwood 6 miles away. I spent an awful lot of my time down here, like, so yeah, it was always in my head at some stage to come back, but I just didn't know what I'd be doing when I did get here, like, you know.
For me, yeah, farming definitely wasn't a natural career path. I grew up on a small farm, the same, managed by my grandmother and my mother. We always had a few cows, they were like pets. So I grew up around cows, but my most important role on the farm was a gap stander. It was just to stand there, you know, be shouted at to run to the next one when you were moving them, and that was about it. And particularly as a teenager, I had no interest, and as an adult, it never even crossed my mind. But when we did decide to come back, and I knew he might want to do something at farming, I thought, well, I'm going to go back to Ireland, I'll go back to college. So I went back as a mature student, started doing geography, got into the environment, and from there, randomly ended up getting involved with agri-policy and from an environmental perspective. So yeah, I did a master's then in agriculture, climate change and food nutritional security, and it was brilliant. And I was writing my thesis on how we could reduce beef and dairy consumption and the potential to reduce the country's national emissions through sustainable diets. And MJ put 15 heifers on the ground. So yeah, that kind of opened up a whole new world of now what do we do. So it still took us a few years from there to figure out where we'd go, but that was definitely the fun part.
It was the start.
Yeah. So we are Farming for Nature ambassadors from 2020, I think. Yeah, for me, when I was writing my thesis, I was caught up myself in kind of looking at the carbon footprint of food, and had removed myself from the actual process of producing food. And when MJ brought the heifers on, and the first time they calved down in 2017, I remembered how amazing it was to be around animals, and I thought, okay, this is great. But so then I needed to kind of open my own mindset, I suppose, to reading around different things. And the first thing I came across was the stuff on high nature value farming out of Sligo YT. And then from there, ended up getting into a load of other stuff around farming for nature, farming naturally. Organics was always going to be, you know, that was always going to be a given for us. And over the years, and still now, we're just constantly learning. I suppose our number one principle is to remember that we are within this setting, and we're trying to farm within the limits of the farm without seeing the limit as a negative. So this is our farm, this is what it can do, here are the cows, and you know, we've taken some time to build the herd that we have because they suit that system. So we're always trying to suit the farm rather than forcing the farm to be something that it's not. So that always forces it to kind of look from a nature-based solution. I suppose in agroecology is the big fancy term for it, but that's just trying to remember that it's agriculture and ecology as one rather than, I suppose, agri-industry. That's kind of the approach that we take, so it's slightly different. Yeah, so through college and then through getting involved in different things, we got to know different people in agriculture who were, I suppose, doing things differently, whether it was selling direct or beef, raw milk, different things like that. And we were kind of at this stage, had the sucklers and we were mob grazing and things, and it was fantastic. It was a very low input, cost effective system, but you couldn't make a living off it. So we decided at that stage we wanted to make a living off the land, and how would we do it? And MJ was being convinced to stand in the camera once again, and he went and spoke to his mother about the field names, and she told you the story of the Gleann Buí.
Yeah, the farm is called Gleann Buí Farm, but it's actually named after one of the fields over there. And when my mum was a kid around here, they used to always have the house cow, and they'd be making the butter and the cream and all that kind of stuff like. But when the cows would be grazing in the Gleann Buí, the butter was golden in colour, like, so it was the field for making butter out of. The idea of milking cows and selling raw milk, I suppose it was thrown up in the air 100 times if it was thrown once. And we played with the idea for 2 or 3 years because it was the kind of thing that if you committed to it, you had to run with it. Like, milking cows, as they all say, it's 24/7, like, for a lot of people. It is a big commitment. So, but it was also, I love the idea of being able to produce something on the farm that would feed people locally, like, that other people would benefit from as well, maybe, like, you know, and that we could live on the farm. Wouldn't be millionaires, but you'd make a few quid and tip away, like. So yeah, it was something that it just kept coming back to it when I keep thinking, what would we do or how could we do it, like. So it just came back to the milk, and then through an organisation that Sinead was part of setting up, Future, I ended up meeting with a couple of other different people that were doing something similar to this further down the country. So I went and had a chat with them as well, and we kind of came away and we said, yeah, look, we're either going for it or we're not.
So we were really lucky to inherit a farm that was never farmed intensely, so we've really species-rich grass, we've thick hedgerows, we've 17 acres around here, and that's broken up into 11 different paddocks, so it's a lovely kind of small, biodiverse, rich farm. But the only thing we didn't have was we had no infrastructure. So we had a big capital investment in that sense, in that we had to build a small parlour, we had to build a processing room, and we had to build a shed, because before that we had just outwintered a few sucklers, which was fine, but with the dairies we knew it was going to be a different system. So MJ has a book of plans, so he's officially an architect at this stage, because we didn't want it to dominate the farm. We still wanted, even here in the little hen paddock, we wanted the trees to be the big feature. So he's designed it in a way that it doesn't dominate, and we start in November 2019.
Yeah, it was little by little, like. The first thing, I suppose, like all small little farms, the pathways weren't built for concrete lorries and tipper wagons and stuff like that. So obviously when you're building something like this, access is a big thing. So we had to kind of make a way in first. And then we just started working away at it, I suppose. The first thing to go in was get a slab in the old hay shed there and get walls up, and then we built around that. But as Sinead said, it was to try and get it all to fit in and to sit in, and I'd say kind of like it was always there, but that it didn't disturb everything that was around it, like, so the old stone cottage and stuff like that was important that it stay. The trees, obviously, they're here, God, I don't know, 150 years or that, so we wanted to be able to do it without disturbing any of that. So I suppose from a building point of view, it was to kind of wiggle it in that way. And then after that, once we had it up and running, it was, you're down the line then of finding your markets and getting the go-ahead to produce, because obviously you're producing food at the end of the day for human consumption. So we had to obviously work with the vets and the department then and everything else to get our processing unit signed off. The whole process in general, that obviously you had something that was safe to consume, like, you know. So yeah, it's been a work in progress, and we're still not
there.
rightly there. We want to add
Butter and cream.
butter, cream, stuff like that. So they're all, if you like, the next stage and the next stage. So at the minute, we're ticking away and we're selling milk, but hopefully further down the road we'll have extra products to add on to the setup, like, you know. So
I think probably the biggest input to the farm is our own labour, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, from day one, even with the sucklers, we always wanted to run a no input system, because when we were running the sucklers, we had no control over the price, but we could control what we were putting into it. So with things like the mob grazing, we instantly went down the pasture for life route. So there was no meal, basically nothing external brought in, again trying to work within the limits of the farm. And then from there with the dairy, that's kind of why we chose the dairy short horn and a few moils, because they kind of fit into that system as well. So the only external input that comes in is probably a seaweed lick in the winter, Himalayan salt and straw. Everything else is kind of found here on the farm itself. And then everything else after that, when we're trying to make grass grow, it's trying to recycle the straw bedding and stuff like the Korean natural farming, and we're just kind of opening ourselves up to loads of different things that we can do from a nature-based solution on the farm.
labour is the big thing.
Yeah.
But every farm has that, like. Labour is labour is your input. Any farmer will say that if you were to get paid for your hours, you wouldn't get paid at all. But I suppose it's not really all about that either, like, you know. We have the pleasure of working in an environment like this, and that itself is a payment, like. No two fields are the same, no 2 weeks are the same, no 2 years are the same. So, like, we don't even have permanent fences dividing up, we'll say, our small fields. Our biggest field is 5 acres, and that's a silage field. With our rotation of grazing, if growth slows down, we can easily change a fence out. Really, last year, and never mind this year, I should have topped off a few of the rushes, but I had other things to be doing, so it didn't really bother me that I didn't do it. But this year, that'll come into the into the work program, like. So every year brings its own different bits and pieces. I suppose the way we'd look at it, if we can keep our day-to-day running costs from a financial point of view, that the cows get everything that they're getting off the land, which we feel they are, and that involves the hedgerows and everything else, you're controlling your inputs, because you cannot really control what comes in at the other end, like. It's to find a balance of managing your costs, that it's not impacting the animal or yourself or the ground or anything else like that.
Or the customer.
Like. Or the customer, exactly, yeah, you know, so.
We produce raw milk at the moment, and we also do eggs. So we do organic pasture-raised eggs, and basically that means it's free range, but our birds have a little fruit garden to themselves, and trees, because hens are forest animals, so they do better in that kind of environment. So we also have, our flock is really mixed, so we get a lot of different coloured eggs and the diversity in the eggs, and people like that, and it's kind of like the cows and everything else we're trying to do. I think if we had a number one word to just describe what we're trying to do, it's diversify and be diverse in everything. So we have the eggs as well. And yeah, with the dairy, just bring in more produce. So that's kind of, on the food front, that keeps us busy enough.